The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, September 19th. Saint Januarius, Bishop of Benevento and his companions, Martyrs, AD 305. Saint Januarius, a native some say of Naples, others of Benevento, was bishop of this latter city, when the persecution of Diocletian broke out. Sosius, deacon of Messeno, Proculus, deacon of Pozzuoli, and Eutyches or Eutychides and Acutius, eminent laymen, were imprisoned at Pozzuoli for the faith by an order of Dracontius, governor of Campania, before whom they had confessed their faith. Sosius, by his singular wisdom and sanctity, had been worthy of the intimate friendship of Saint Januarius, who reposed in him an entire confidence, and for many years had found no more solid comfort among men than in his holy counsels and conversation. Upon the news that this great servant of God and several others were fallen into the hands of the persecutors, the good bishop determined to make them a visit in order to comfort and encourage them and provide them with every spiritual succor to arm them for their great conflict. In this act of charity, no fear of torments or danger of his life could terrify him, and martyrdom was his recompense. He did not escape the notice of the inquisitive keepers, who gave information that an eminent person from Benevento had visited the Christian prisoners. Timothy, who had just succeeded Dracontius in the government of that district of Italy, gave orders that Januarius, whom he found to be the person, should be apprehended and brought before him at Nola, the usual place of his residence, which was done accordingly. Festus, the bishop's deacon, and Desiderius, a lector of his church, were taken up as they were making him a visit. They had a share in the interrogatories and torments which the good bishop underwent at Nola. Some time after the governor went to Pozzuoli, and these 3 confessors, loaded with heavy irons, were made to walk before his chariot to that town, where they were thrown into the same prison where the 4 martyrs already mentioned were detained. They had been condemned by an order from the emperor to be torn in pieces by wild beasts, and were then lying in expectation of the execution of their sentence. The day after the arrival of Saint Januarius and his 2 companions, all these champions of Christ were exposed to be devoured by the beasts in the amphitheater, but none of the savage animals could be provoked to touch them. The people were amazed, but imputed their preservation to art magic, and the martyrs were condemned to be beheaded. This sentence was executed near Pozzuoli, as Bede testifies, and the martyrs were decently interred near that town. Sometime after the Christian faith was become triumphant, towards the year 400, their precious relics were removed. The bodies of Saints Proculus, Eutyches, and Acutius were placed in a more honorable manner at Pozzuoli. Those of Saints Festus and Desiderius were translated to Benevento, that of Sosius to Messeno, where it was afterward deposited in a stately church built in his honor. The city of Naples was so happy as to get possession of the relics of Saint Januarius. During the wars of the Normans they were removed, first to Benevento and, sometime after, to the Abbey of Montevergine. But in 1497 they were brought back to Naples, which city has long honored him as principal patron. Among many miraculous deliverances which it ascribes to the intercession of this great saint, none is looked upon as more remarkable than its preservation from the fiery eruptions of Mount Vesuvius, now called La Somma, which is only 8 miles distant, and which has often threatened the entire destruction of this city, both by the prodigious quantities of burning sand, ashes, and stones, which it throws up on those occasions to a much greater distance than Naples, and by a torrent of burning sulfur, niter, calcined stones, and other materials, which, like a liquid fire, has sometimes gushed from that volcano, and, digging itself a channel, which has sometimes been 2 or 3 miles broad, rolled its flaming waves through the valley into the sea, destroying towns and villages in its way, and often passing near Naples. Some of these eruptions, which in the 5th and 7th centuries threatened this city with destruction by the clouds of ashes which they raised, are said to have darkened the sky as far as Constantinople and struck terror into the inhabitants of that capital. The intercession of Saint Januarius was implored at Naples on those occasions, and the divine mercy so wonderfully interposed in causing these dreadful evils suddenly to cease thereupon, especially in 1685, Benedict II being pope, and Justinian, the younger emperor, that the Greeks instituted a feast in honor of Saint Januarius, with 2 yearly solemn processions to return thanks to God. The protection of the city of Naples from this dreadful volcano by the same means was most remarkable in the years 1631 and 1707. In this last, whilst Cardinal Francis Pignatelli, with the clergy and people, devoutly followed the shrine of St. Januarius in procession to a chapel at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, the fiery eruption ceased. The mist, which before was so thick that no one could see another at the distance of 3 yards, was scattered, and at night the stars appeared in the sky. The standing miracle, as it is called by Baronius, of the blood of St. Januarius liquefying and boiling up at the approach of the martyr's head is likewise very famous. In a rich chapel, called the Treasury, in the great church at Naples, are preserved the blood, in 2 very old glass vials, and the head of St. Januarius. The blood is congealed and of a dark color, but when brought in sight of the head, though at a considerable distance, it melts, bubbles up, and upon the least motion flows on any side. The fact is attested by Baronius Ribadenera and innumerable other eye-witnesses of all nations and religions, many of whom most attentively examined all the circumstances. Certain Jesuits sent by Bollandus to Naples were allowed by the Archbishop, Cardinal Filomarini, to see this prodigy. The minute description of the manner in which it is performed is related by them in the life of Bollandus. It happens equally in all seasons of the year and in variety of circumstances. The usual times when it is performed are the Feast of St. Januarius, the 19th of September, that of the translation of his relics, when they were brought from Pozzuoli to Naples, the Sunday which falls next to the calends of May, and the 20th day of December, on which in 1631 a terrible eruption of Mount Vesuvius was extinguished upon invoking the patronage of this martyr. The same is done on extraordinary occasions at the discretion of the Archbishop. This miraculous solution and ebullition of the blood of St. Januarius is mentioned by Pope Pius II when he speaks of the reign of Alphonsus I of Aragon, King of Naples, in 1450. Angelus Cato, an eminent physician of Salerno, and others mention it in the same century. Almost 200 years before that epoch, historians take notice that King Charles I of Anjou, coming to Naples, the Archbishop brought out the head and blood of this martyr. The continuator of the Chronicle of Miraldus says the same was done upon the arrival of King Roger, who venerated these relics in 1140. Falco of Benevento relates the same thing. From several circumstances, this miracle is traced much higher, and it is said to have regularly happened on the annual feast of St. Januarius, and on that of the translation of his relics from the time of that translation about the year 400. Miracles recorded in Holy Scripture are revealed facts and an object of faith. Other miracles are not considered in the same light, neither does our faith rest upon them as upon the former, though they illustrate and confirm it, nor do they demand or admit any higher assent than that which prudence requires, and that which is due to the evidence or human authority upon which they depend. When such miracles are propounded, they are not to be rashly admitted. The evidence of the fact and circumstances ought to be examined to the bottom and duly weighed. Where that fails, it is the part of prudence to suspend or refuse our assent. Also, if it appears doubtful whether an effect be natural or proceed from a supernatural interposition, our assent ought to lean according to the greater weight of probability, and God, who is author of all events, natural and supernatural, is always to be glorified. If human evidence set the certainty of a miracle above the reach of any doubt, it must more powerfully excite us to raise our minds to God in sentiments of humble adoration, love, and praise, and to honor Him in His saints, when by such wonderful means He gives us sensible proofs of the glory and favor to which He exalts them, and of the tenderness with which He watches over their mortal remains to raise them one day in a state of glorious immortality.